Hey everybody, this is Mr. Fuller, and today I want to talk about our assignment from this week, which is Vietnam War Part 2. What I really want to focus on is the Vietnam War because it was our longest war, but more importantly, I want you to think about how did the United States, the most powerful nation in the world, lose to a tiny, underdeveloped country like Vietnam? So, what really want to look at today is what it was like for the soldiers fighting in Vietnam, and then the various tactics, the strategies. How did they fight this war that led to the U.S. losing? So, our objective this week was to look at historical sources to understand soldiers' lives and combat tactics. Now, I bet a lot of you are familiar with the word tactic. You probably use it in video games, Call of Duty, or maybe a soccer game or anything else, where the idea is that you have certain plans, certain strategies, actions or methods that is planned and used to achieve a particular goal, to win a game. Well, in a war, we want to talk about the tactics. And those tactics are how the soldiers fought and how they planned on winning this war. The second word I want you to know is ambush. So I had you use this Learner's Dictionary link. We'll go ahead and drop ambush in here. I copied it. And we'll paste it. I know you can do this on your own, but ambush. An act of hiding, waiting for others to appear, and then suddenly attacking them. A surprise attack. So I'm going to go Control C. I like to copy things that way. And I'm going to dump it back here in our document. There we go. So we're going to talk about ambushes and tactics. So what I want to do is take a look at these documents here. I'm going to start right here in the life of a soldier. I have this great little thing. I got it at the Chrome store. It allows you to split screen on your Chrome tabs. So I like to use this, especially when I'm doing an assignment where I go back and forth. So I want to look at this document on the right to help answer these questions over here. So the first thing I want to talk about is the difficult climate. The climate is the terrain, the landscape where people live. And the thing I want you to know that Vietnam was very different than what America was used to, largely because it's jungle. Vietnam is mostly jungle, which is very hot and humid. Humid is wet, damp, that heavy air. The sun scorched, burned soldiers, and in the rainy season, it would rain on the soldiers for days. Soldiers had to hack, cut through thick jungles in this brutal heat and pouring rain. Soldiers also had to deal with scorpions, biting insects, and snakes, which is my worst nightmare. I'm terrified of snakes. In addition to a difficult climate, there were also many diseases. Many American soldiers got very sick and made the already weakened soldiers suffer even more. So in this picture, you can see how thick and heavy that jungle is, all the wet water, and the soldiers had to live outside in those conditions. So my first question for what life was like as a soldier is describe how the climate and landscape of Vietnam was a challenge, difficult for U.S. soldiers. Well, I went back here and focused on this one. I said thick jungles that were hot and humid. I wanted you to get the idea across that that's not like most places in America. We don't have a lot of heavy jungle, so a lot of the people weren't used to it, and they weren't used to the heat. Another thing that was a challenge, I thought about saying scorpions or snakes, but instead I went with diseases. You can see on the left, I said diseases got many Americans very sick. So we weren't used to the climate, and then there was all sorts of diseases that the Vietnamese were used to, but Americans weren't. So a lot of American soldiers got really sick. They would get bitten by insects and other things that would cause them to get really ill. So section 2, what I wanted to focus on is what did soldiers do? Well, as you can imagine, fighting in a war is very stressful. We know what it's like to be under stress. We all have experienced it in our lives. But when you have someone trying to kill you and you're at land far away, it gets even more stressful. An American reporter said the biggest challenge that U.S. soldiers had in Vietnam was boredom. And you guys know nothing about boredom, right? You guys are at home. You're not bored at all, I'm sure. To fight boredom, soldiers played cards, listened to Army radio programs, and wrote letters home. So, very simple. They didn't have a lot to do. They didn't have TV, they didn't have books, and they were always kind of worried about getting shot. But when they had downtime, they were bored. So I'm just going to copy this, Control C. Or if you'd like to, you can highlight and right click and go copy. And I'm going to paste it. That's going to be my answer. So you can see in this picture, guys playing a guitar and singing songs. Remember, they didn't have iPhones. They didn't have a Game Boy. They had nothing. So here they are playing a card game in South Vietnam. Just hanging out. But this is the one that's really important. The next question. Stress caused soldiers to do what? Well, during the Vietnam, morale, state of mind decreased. Morale, how you feel about something, how you feel about your team, how you feel about school. Well, they were kind of soldiers. They were on a team, and their morale started to decrease. They were in a jungle, and they were scared. People were shooting at them, and this led to stress. Stress from combat and fighting and bad living conditions often led to other problems. Some soldiers began using drugs and alcohol. I'm going to copy that again. This war was different in that people started using illegal drugs in this war. They were widely available in Vietnam. Soldiers started taking pills. Many began shooting heroin because it grew in South Asia, and a lot used marijuana in addition to drinking, which was readily available. So this really affected the soldiers. It led to many people having addiction problems and people actually being out in combat while they were under the influence of drugs. Section 3. Explain how the Viet Cong used tunnels to help them fight Americans. Remember, Vietnam was a small country and they didn't have the weapons that we did. So they created these tunnel systems. I wish I had a better picture of this, but this was the most clear one I could find. And if you look at this in the bottom, the Viet Cong, who was our enemy, dug thousands of miles of tunnels, thousands of miles all over Vietnam to hide from U.S. troops. The VC soldiers used these tunnels to house, keep people live, troops and supplies. They would lay traps and make surprise attacks. The VC could attack the U.S. soldiers, then disappear back into the safety of the tunnel. So if you look at this picture, it's really kind of cool. They would dig these little bunkers and have this whole tunnel network. They would live secretly underground, and they would sleep, and they could go down deep in case there was a bombing attack. They would reinforce this with wood and bamboo. They could crawl from room to room. Down deeper, they could make little first aid rooms. Look, they had a bike generator so you could ride it and light up the lights so they could see. They would hide ammunition. They would have wells, little cooking places, and then the smoke from the cooking underground would filter out another place in the jungle. A lot of these passages you can't see in this picture would have dead ends where there would be a trap. So the Americans would try to crawl in and find the Vietnamese and all of a sudden come to a dead end, or they would fall into a trap. But more importantly, not shown in this picture, is lots of times the Americans would just walk right over hey, what's that smoke? What's going on there? And they would walk and they couldn't figure out why the smoke was coming from the underground. And the Viet Cong would pop up behind them over here and shoot them in the back, throw a grenade at them, and then disappear in the ground. And the Americans felt like they were fighting an enemy that just disappeared. They would pop up, attack, and disappear. So tunnels became very effective. So what they did, again, I would go with this. Control C. The Viet Cong could sneak up and attack Americans. This drove the American. Oh, this is a great little optional. Sorry. If you want to watch this video, it's pretty cool. It goes through how the tunnels were dug and how they lived under there and talks about the tactics. Spend a couple minutes and watch that. It's really kind of interesting. As you can imagine, this drove the Americans crazy. And so, because we have more technology and airplanes, the Vietnamese didn't have any, we started trying to fight the war differently. Well, one thing we did is we created this chemical called Agent Orange. And here you can see why they called it Agent Orange. Look at the color. And an American plane is flying over the jungle in Vietnam and dropping this chemical. The U.S. tried to destroy the jungle so the VC, the Viet Cong, their enemy, could not hide. The U.S. used Agent Orange, a powerful chemical, to kill the forest. Agent Orange caused serious health issues. The chemicals caused cancer, birth defects, rashes, nervous problems. It not only hurt the Vietnamese people, but also the American soldiers that handled, the ones that flew these planes and loaded on the chemicals. They also got really sick from it. People started getting cancer years later. But the idea was that Americans said, okay, you're going to hide in the jungle. We're going to remove that jungle with chemicals. So we dumped thousands and millions of gallons of chemicals all over Vietnam. Think about how crazy that is. The second big thing we did, is started using napalm. We had napalm in World War II. It's this flammable, sticky kind of jelly. It's gooey, it sticks to you. It's in bombs and flamethrowers. But during Vietnam, it became one of the most deadly weapons during the Vietnam War. At first, we used it to try to clear out those tunnels with flamethrowers. But later on, we started dropping it bombs to try to burn out the jungle. But the problem is when you're dropping napalm bombs from jets, it was not accurate. This resulted in a large number of innocent civilians, Vietnamese people, not soldiers, were suffering serious harm and death. So you can see in this bottom picture a little boy that was burned. Napalm was accidentally dropped on his village and it caught fire, and this little boy was burned so badly. This happened to a lot of people, and it made U.S. look like bullies. First, we're fighting a smaller country, and then we're doing things like dropping Agent Orange and napalm on these countries. So you can describe that right over here. And the last part I want you to look at is tactics. Again, our word was tactics, strategies. How do we fight the war? Well, there's a good Viet Cong strategy video right here, again from History Channel. It's a couple minutes. It explains how the war was fought. But you can also take a look at this. So, describe the tactics used by the Viet Cong. I put the American tactics up here. So you can see that Vietnam, they didn't have helicopters, they didn't have airplanes, they didn't have heavy artillery and bombers, but we did. So we used those a lot on the people. But when you're dropping bombs into a jungle where you can't always see, it also led to killing many innocent people. And then when we dumped things like Agent Orange and napalm, we hurt a lot of civilians. And ultimately, that's what kind of caused the United States to give up on this war. It made us look really bad. And we felt horrible. War is a bad thing. But when you start killing so many innocent civilians that aren't fighting you, then something's going wrong. So here's the Vietnamese tactics. Again, this video is good. But they fought a guerrilla war. They ambushed. And again, ambush is a sneak attack. So the VC hid among the people in the villages. They wore the clothes and dressed like villagers. The Americans didn't know who was a civilian and who was the enemy trying to kill them. Another tactic was the Viet Cong built complicated underground tunnels to hide supplies and sneak up on soldiers. For example, the Viet Cong would pop up behind Americans, throw a bomb, and then disappear back underground. So the more we started bombing the Vietnamese and spraying Agent Orange, the more tunnels they dug, and they hid from us. And we had a tough time trying to find them. And when they did fight, or when we could find them, they'd often blend in with the civilians, and Americans didn't know who was who. So it was a very frustrating war. The Viet Cong had less technology, but they had the home field advantage. They knew the jungle and they could hide underground. So after many years, this eventually led to the Americans losing the war. So I want you to look through this, and you can type up your answers. You can cut and paste a lot of it, but hopefully this was helpful. What I really want you guys to do is spend the time to do this, because remember, this is pass or incomplete. So if you make an effort on this, you're going to do well and you're going to pass this class and you'll be in good shape and you won't have to repeat this and risk seeing me again in 2 years. You don't want that to happen. But if you need help with this, hopefully this can give you a hand. And if not, just email me. Okay. I'll talk to you guys soon.